The hum of propellers was as common a soundtrack to the town of Gareth as the wind that flicked torn prayer flags along shattered roofs. Cargo drones skimmed over cratered streets and knotted alleys carrying medicines, packets of seeds, halfway assembled schoolbooks, whatever could be ordered from the outside world without crossing the blasted ring roads. But if anyone bothered to look up from the dust, they might have noticed one particular flight path. A slender black quadcopter that veered left where the others veered right, dipped when the others climbed, and disappeared toward the old clock tower each sunset instead of gliding back to the distribution hangar on the ridge. Its pilot was a young woman named Sarah Bashir, though her coworkers scarcely remembered her face. She kept her goggles on even in the briefing rooms, answering mandatory check-ins with clipped syllables. Outside the warehouse, she avoided the cafes where gig couriers bragged about daily kilometer totals and close calls with low-tech insurgent jammers. She would sign out her assigned delivery swarm, lift off, and vanish into the orange haze. Sarah liked the privacy the goggles offered. The mirrored plates threw back curious stares, and the binaural audio blocked out gossip. Under the tinted lens, her eyes flicked among telemetry streams, but occasionally she let them linger on the ruins below, on her childhood routes to school, now a maze of barricades painted with fresh sigils every week as lines of influence shifted. Sometimes she would catch a glimpse of the people who occupied those ruins. Boys kicking a rag ball on a rooftop, an old woman hanging laundry whose colors had survived 5 washings of ash, 2 men arguing across a toppled marble fountain that had once belonged to a famous square. Sightings like those would stay with her long after she landed. Long after she parked her official drones in their charging cradles and slipped the empty backpacks of medicine and letters onto scanning belts. She had another fleet waiting for her in the attic of the abandoned library. They looked nothing like the polished courier units these were scavenged from: downed recon craft, tourism toys, kids' racing frames whose owners had outgrown them or been carried away by enlistment. Each casing bore scratches, bullet dimples, or scorch marks. One still had a wayward bit of graffiti reading, "Only Tariq loves Z," along its motor arm. What Sarah saw in the pile was potential. Every spare evening, after her shift reports were filed, she climbed the dusty spiral stairs of the library's hollow tower with a soldering kit, spools of LED tape, and an aging laptop whose keyboard had Arabic glyphs half worn away. On the roof, the wind smelled faintly of cordite and roasted chickpeas from the night market that still operated 2 streets west, like in death in a single breath. There, she reprogrammed flight controllers, patched wires, and mounted light modules to chassis that were never designed for display. Her project had begun by accident months earlier. Drone 1316, named them only by number, had short-circuited during a test flight and fallen behind a courtyard wall. When she searched for it among the rubble, a small crowd of neighborhood children had followed, chattering with curiosity. To keep them from drawing attention, she'd let the remaining 2 craft hover and dance in tight spirals overhead, their diagnostic LEDs flashing as the gyros recalibrated. The children squealed and one shouted, "It's a wedding bird!" That night, lying on a cot beneath sagging bookshelves, Sarah had remembered the lantern festivals her mother used to describe. How sky lanterns in pre-war Garaf once rose like schools of fish, weaving stories in colored flames. The festivals had stopped long before Sarah was born, revived briefly after the first ceasefire, then banned again when skirmishes reignited. But people still sang the festival songs in kitchens, soft enough that patrols couldn't hear. Why couldn't light return to the sky, she wondered. Why couldn't stories? So the rehearsals began. She downloaded animation software, studied classic string puppet choreography for timing references, scribbled loops of folklore in the margins of delivery manifests. She chose tales that her mother's voice still carried through her memory: the Weaver and the Falcon, the river that split the mountain, the 2 brothers who shared a single heart. She translated each scene into aerial calligraphy, lines, shapes, cascades of color, that could be read whether you knew the stories or not. She added subtle thumps to the drone rotors so that when a dozen craft accelerated together, the beating air itself drummed like a talking timbre. And she set a rule for herself: no more than 20 minutes of battery per performance, no more than 20 craft, always dispersed westward at the finale so any watchers would lose track of origin. It wasn't merely secrecy. She knew that in a place where surveillance was both a weapon and a defense, ambiguity was mercy. On the first night she tried a full show, she positioned herself behind the wrought iron lattice that crowned the library tower. The sky was clear, but for drifting haze, illuminated by a three-quarter moon. Using a handheld controller patched to a cracked tablet, she launched 5 drones to scout wind eddies. Then, on her signal, 15 more rose, each LED bar ramping from indigo to gold. Sarah's breath synced with theirs. Inhale, lift, exhale, turn. The choreography formed the weaver's loom, parallel lines that split, crossed, rejoined, becoming a bird whose wings unfurled into constellations. At the crescendo, the drones scattered in a shower of turquoise. Silence followed, except for the soft clatter of propellers cycling downward. She thought no one had noticed. 2 days later, a message appeared on the community board outside the bread co-op. To whoever paints stars, we saw the falcon. It carried us past the checkpoints. Bless you. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were precise. Sarah tore the note down, folded it into her pocket, and told herself it was coincidence. Yet she doubled her caution-checked frequency, overlap with military channels, installed fallback geofences, practiced emergency descents through gaps in roofs. The performances continued, irregularly but persistently, always shortly after curfew, because that was when families were forced indoors and therefore forced to look up through the jagged holes in ceilings. Rumor named the phenomenon the silent cinema, because no amplified sound accompanied the lights, only whirring wings and the occasional collective gasp from watchers. Soon, painted stars appeared on doorframes, silver pinpoints dabbed where bullet holes had been plastered over. A vendor began selling cinema loaves, bread sprinkled with sesame arranged in swirling patterns. When the drones traced the river scene, someone splashed blue dye across the barricade facing the municipal building, and nobody painted over it. Still, Sarah remained unknown. She delivered parcels by day, nodded to warehouse supervisors who believed her shyness was mere company to her competence, and by night climbed the spiral stairs to orchestrate myth. The anonymity comforted her. She had grown up in a household where speaking too loudly about anything, politics, faith, even love, could summon soldiers to the door. Her mother had survived that tension by playing oud in weddings of every clan, every allegiance. Music is neutral until you sing, she used to say. Sarah, sitting cross-legged on a rooftop, realized that her lights were music dressed in code. They belonged to everyone and no one until the crowd sang the rest. It was inevitable that someone with sharper tools would start to trace the vectors back to origin. The 3rd Division garrison, occupying the former high school, had radar. After a performance featuring 32 drones, it had been Eid, she'd wanted to risk something bigger. She intercepted a bulletin on the open band. Unidentified aerial devices over Sector Delta. Possible propaganda. Track and detain operator. The message chilled her. She grounded the fleet for 12 nights and spent the hiatus repairing only 2 units. Her first and her latest. She called it a farewell project, one more tale. Then she would dismantle the rigs and scatter them among safe houses. During those idle nights, the town felt heavier, as though expectation itself pressed against the broken walls. People still gathered in courtyards at curfew hour, heads tilted upward. Sometimes the children tried to replicate the drone formations with sparklers until parents pulled them inside. Checkpoints grew harsher and bread prices rose. New graffiti appeared, crossed out stars, curses at the garrison, curses at the rebels, curses at the sky. Sarah lay awake, unable to deflect the guilt. If hope starved, wasn't the one who had fed it partly responsible? On the 13th night, she decided. The library roof creaked as she hauled up the portable ground station, but the wind was calm. She selected the 2 brothers who shared a single heart as finale. It was a fable about twins separated by war who found each other again through an impossible journey. A sentimental choice, perhaps even naive, yet its lesson, that what is divided can by equal measure be reunited, felt urgent. She launched only 12 drones, each with double bright LEDs and backup batteries. Their flight plan formed 2 spirals, coiling inward until they overlapped in a glowing red core. Meanwhile, Saha guided 2 decoy drones far east to entice radar sweeps. The timing required split-screen focus. Her fingers flew over virtual joysticks. From alleys and windows, silhouettes emerged like seeds drawn to light. Grandmothers clutching enamel teapots, teenagers draped in team scarves from football clubs that no longer existed, mechanics with oil duck hands, rebel sentries who should have been patrolling. The spirals tightened, a heartbeat pulsed across the sky, red, white, red, syncopated 42 beats per minute, the tempo of a lullaby her mother had hummed. Then the drones fused into a single blazing orb that climbed, paused, and unfurled white wings across the breadth of Main Street. Gasps below turned into applause, not polite but primal, the kind reserved for the first signs of rain after a drought. Sarah's goggles flagged a sudden spike on military radar. She triggered dispersal, craft banked hard west and east, shedding strobes that dived into shadow corridors. One, overloaded with an LED strip, failed to pull out of a turn and clipped a minaret. Sparks showered, the drone tumbled onto the marble forecourt where a small audience scurried backward. Searchlights swept, sirens flared. Syra shut down transmitters and yanked her goggles away, heart hammering louder than rotor thrum. She listened for boots on the library steps. None yet. But she heard something else, cheers continuing amid the sirens. The crowd refused to be cowed. Morning arrived with military vehicles idling at intersections, but no arrests were announced. The crash site had been cleared before patrols arrived. Rumor claimed a veiled woman had ferried the wreckage in her shawl and vanished. At the co-op, a new poster read, "The cinema will return. Our heart is still in the sky." That afternoon, while Sarah queued for a refit kit in the warehouse, a supervisor approached with clipped authority. "But sure, you have visitors." Two men waited near the exit, one in civilian garb, one in patched fatigues with no insignia. Her throat constricted. But when she stepped closer, she saw they carried a carry case from a popular sweets shop. The civilian extended it. "For you, from the families of Marcus Street. They said the baklava should travel safely by drone next time." His eyes met hers with unmistakable gratitude. The soldier's stance softened. "We'd like to discuss making your shows official," he murmured. "There's a festival in 3 weeks. The commander wants something to remind people why we endure this ceasefire." Sarah could hardly breathe. Co-option was a trap, yet outright refusal might expose her more. "I only deliver packages," she muttered. The civilian smiled. "So, deliver this, then. Deliver one night where our children learn to look up without fear." He pressed the sweets into her arms, and both men walked away. That evening, the library tower welcomed her again, now laden with questions heavier than spare lion cells. To accept institutional backing risked turning the silent cinema into propaganda. To decline risked losing the fragile shelter the garrison's tolerance provided. In her uncertainty, she booted the laptop and opened a blank storyboard. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat waiting. Memories rushed, her mother's oud, her father reciting verses about horizons, the children calling a diagnostic spiral a wedding bird. She drafted a new program, layering colors not of factions but of seasons, greens of spring, olives, golds of harvest wheat, whites of winter almond blossoms, none had seen since the orchard belts were mined. Then she encoded patterns derived from different clan embroideries so that any spectator might claim part of the sky. She called the sequence Confluence. Weeks passed in fevered preparation. Official engineers arrived with fresh batteries and asked no questions about serial numbers. Elder women from rival neighborhoods volunteered to sew signal flags that would cue the audience when to sing. The garrison promised to jam only hostile frequencies for the duration of the show. The rebels, informed by mysterious leaflets depicting intertwined stars, agreed to hold fire if no troops advanced during the hour. It felt like negotiating a miracle. On the night of the festival, Sarah stood not alone on the tower, but among 20 assistants, kids she taught to monitor battery temps, retirees assigned to spot malfunctioning rotors. When the curfew siren wailed, nobody retreated indoor. Instead, families poured into the central square that still bore mortar scars. Lantern posts were repaired just enough to hang strings of copper bells. The moon hid, the sky waited. "Clear for launch," she whispered. A chorus of clear echoed back. The first wave of drones rose in synchronized silence, lights dark. When they reached 100 meters, bulbs flicked on, soft, lambent green like buds before dawn. A collective sigh lifted from the square. Second wave, third wave, each adding hue-amber swirls, violet ribbons. They spiraled around an invisible axis, leaving light trails that painted a vast rug over the town. Sarah's code had them weave in and out, trading positions so quickly that patterns seemed to bloom and wilt within breaths. At midpoint, signal flags rippled from rooftops. A women's chorus began an ancient harvest chant, answered by a men's refrain from across the square, combining into harmony once banned on state radio for being tribally divisive. Sung together now, division dissolved. The drones responded. Their LEDs pulsed exactly to the chant's 5/8 beat, forming tessellations of merging colors. Whispers of "I remember" drifted, carried by those who had not dared remember aloud. Then came the heart. Two formations entered from opposite edges, red at their cores, white at their wings, each half needing the other to complete the shape. They approached. The square held its breath. Closer, closer, a meter between, 30 centimeters, 10. The LEDs flared, and with machine precision and human hope, locked into a complete heart that brightened until it eclipsed the stars. The bells on lantern posts rang as wind from the propellers descended like applause from heaven itself. Sarah's goggles blurred with tears she no longer feared. Through them, she watched the crowd. People clasped hands across uniforms, across griefs, across arguments no one remembered how to articulate. Children sat on strangers' shoulders, pointing. Somewhere an oud struck a chord, awkward but earnest, and an aging voice began a melody that must have been her mother's once. Other instruments joined: flute, metal water jug, turned drum, rusted trumpet, found who knows where. The sky answered. The drones executed a final flourish, trailing stardust algorithms that dissolved into the night like promises released yet kept. When the batteries dipped below safe threshold, Sarah announced, "Disengage, recover." Cheerful acknowledgments crackled. The drones glided to predetermined rooftops where volunteers whisked them beneath tarps. The heart above fragmented gently into drifting motes that looked uncannily like lanterns of the old festivals, each flicker a memory and a seed. Down in the square, the chant had transitioned into laughter, chatting, impromptu market stalls opening, though curfew technically persisted. Divided families, those whose sons stood on opposite checkpoints, whose daughters had married across sect lines, then fled, found one another in the swirl. Some sobbed, others exchanged slipping smiles, like children sneaking sweets. Nobody seemed ready to surrender the night to politics again. Sarah descended the library staircase halfway before pausing. The festival committee had insisted she stand on a balcony for applause, present her face so the town could thank its starbinder. She had agreed in principle, but now found her feet rooted. Not in fear, she felt strangely calm, but in understanding. The stories didn't belong to her, they belonged to whoever told them next. She could remain unseen, and the lights would still glow in memory. Yet a new sound rose, her name. First, questioningly, then, in chorus, "Sarah! Sarah!" How had they known? Perhaps the volunteers, perhaps the garrison, perhaps the inevitable gossip of drone technicians. But the chant was affectionate, not demanding. It invited. She climbed back up, crossed the roof toward the parapet, and removed her goggles. Wind kissed her bare eyes. Hundreds of faces turned skyward still, though the show had ended. But when someone spotted her silhouette on the parapet, hands lifted in salute. She raised her own, palms outward, a gesture from another fated custom meaning, "I am yours as you are mine." In that moment, she understood introversion was not the same as invisibility. She could be quiet and still belong, could program silence and still be heard. Below, peace was fragile, tomorrow uncertain. Yet above, tonight had rewritten the sky's memory with lines of courage. Whatever wars resumed, the people would remember the heart made whole and demand its reflection in their streets. Sarah donned her goggles again, not to hide but to magnify. She scanned the rooftops where volunteers signaled OK signs, systems, green. Batteries, charging. A new queue of patterns awaited in her storyboard. The rainmaker, the seedling phoenix, the caravan of hinged moons. Tales enough to outlast any artillery barrage. She keyed the ground station for diagnostics, but her gaze lingered on the blinking cursor of the program she hadn't saved. The screen asked for a file name. She typed tomorrow, hit save, and closed the laptop. The wind carried the last echoes of singing into the valley as Sarah descended to join the gathered families, not as a legend or operative, but as another citizen looking for the path home, lit by stories in coded light that she, once upon a time, had dared to imagine.